Something I always like to have stocked in my freezer, especially during the summertime, is burger buns. And I like to make my own from scratch because A, it's cheaper, B, I think they taste better, and C, it's actually quite easy. The recipe that I use is from King Arthur flour, and I will leave it linked down below. This is my tried and true recipe. I've made it so many times. This is not sourdough, it's just regular yeast. One recipe makes 8 burger buns, but I think today I'm gonna double it because I would like to have a bunch of extra that I can put in my freezer. These freeze beautifully, they thaw out beautifully. So I'm going to gather all the things that I need and then I'll get started on the buns. Okay, so as I said, I'm doubling this recipe and I've never doubled this before, but I don't see why it shouldn't work out just fine. I've doubled plenty of other bread recipes in the past and it's always been fine. So we're just gonna see. Just remember, I'm doubling everything, so the amounts on the scale are not going to be what it says on the recipe. So I'm starting with my flour. I might have to go get more. Oh, we might have just enough. Yay. Okay, next is water. Now the butter, the eggs, oops, sugar, yeast, I'm gonna mix this around just a little bit. And I'm gonna do this whole thing in my KitchenAid, but I have definitely made it many times by hand and it turns out just fine. But I have a KitchenAid, so why not use it? I don't really know that this step is necessary, just kind of pre-mixing, but sometimes I do it, sometimes I don't. And then I'm just gonna add the salt. All right, now I will bring this over to my KitchenAid with the dough hook attachment and let it do its thing for a few minutes until this dough is nice and smooth. Most times when I'm using my stand mixer, at some point in the middle, I like to just open it up and either scrape down the sides if it needs or kind of get this off the dough hook. Just because sometimes it can sort of get stuck in the same exact pattern and cycle with the dough in the same way. I don't know if that makes sense, but I feel like it's good to kind of mix it around a little bit and give it new parts of the dough to work with. So I just take it off the hook and then restart it. All right, as you just saw, hopefully, the dough is completely pulling away cleanly from the sides. And hopefully you can tell that it's a lot less sticky than it just was a couple minutes ago. So I think I'm gonna take it out of here. So here's what it looks like. It is nice and stretchy and smooth looking. And something that you'll hear a lot when you follow any sort of bread recipe is a lot of people will say to look and see that the dough passes the window pane test. So I'll just show you what that means. So what that means is if you pull the dough up, you're able to stretch it. See how it's like pretty see-through, but it's not breaking? So this means it passes the window pane test. If I did this and went to stretch it and it just broke immediately like this, that would mean it's not quite ready yet and it still needed to develop some more gluten. I always like, even if I do my dough in the KitchenAid, I always like to just give it a few kneads on the counter. It's probably just because I like the way it feels to knead dough by hand. So I'm just gonna go turn it out onto the counter, knead it for, I don't know, 20 seconds, just to say I did. And then I'll put it back in this bowl so that it can rise. I'm putting a tiny bit of flour on the counter, and then I will take the dough out. This right here is called a dough scraper, and until recently I never thought I needed one. I was like, my hands are just fine. But actually, this thing is amazing. It's just so helpful at getting the dough out, and you can really scrape the sides of the bowl easily. I mean, look at that. I'm just gonna knead this a few times. Hopefully you can tell how smooth and soft it is. It feels really nice. Before I put it in the bowl, I like to make it into a ball. But if I push into it, see how the dough kind of springs back a little bit? That's what you're looking for. So I'm gonna put this back into here. Actually, I'm gonna spray this. Let me get my spray. So this is what I'm using, just this avocado oil spray. I'm not even gonna rinse this out. I'm just gonna spray, and then I'll use this. Plop it into the bowl. And the next step is that this has to double in size. So that will take anywhere from 1 to 2 hours. So I'm going to cover it. You can use plastic wrap, you can use a plate, but I just wet this tea towel and I'm gonna put it over the top. And I'll come back when this has risen and is about double what it is now. All right, it's been an hour and my house is very warm today. So the dough rose pretty quickly. As you can see, it is nicely puffed up and much larger than it was when I first started. I'm grabbing my little dough spatula and gently putting this out on the counter. All right, now I'm switching to my bench scraper, which I use this thing all the time. I love it so much. I don't only use it for bread, I use it for so many purposes. And I will always link all the stuff that I use in the description box if you're ever curious. So now I have to divide this into 16 equal-ish pieces. If you've learned anything about me from my previous videos, it's that I pretty much don't really measure a lot of things. So I am not gonna weigh out, you know, each bun to make sure that's exactly the same size. If you would like to do that, on the website for the recipe, it says to make each bun about 100 grams, but I'm just gonna eyeball it and make the buns as even as I can. And if they're not exactly the same, it's fine. It's just for me and my family and friends. So first I'll split it in half. So then each of these halves should make 8 buns. So I'm just gonna sort of get the air out a little bit and make it into a sort of rectangle. And then I'll cut this in half. These. And don't worry, if I start rolling out these buns and I notice that one is way bigger than another one, I can easily just rip off a piece of dough from one and add it to another, and it'll be totally fine. But now what I have to do is get these into a bun shape. So what I do is I put the dough on the counter, and then I just grab pieces from the outside and bring them into the middle. And I just keep going around like this until you'll start to feel and see that it gets a little bit tighter. And then once it feels tight enough, I roll it this way, kind of like give it a little tug against the counter. And then I cut my hand like this and just use the counter to roll the dough in my palm until it makes a nice round ball like that. Then I give it a little press, and then this is ready to go on the baking sheet. So sometimes it sticks to the counter a little bit. So I use my bench scraper, pick it up, and then this will go right on my baking sheet. So I'm gonna do this times 16. And again, if I make my buns and I notice that some are significantly smaller than others, I can just take pieces off of one bun, put it onto another, and then reshape them. It's really not a big deal. So I'm gonna just work on the other buns now. This one feels smaller than the other ones, so I think I'm just gonna take some dough from here and just quickly reshape it. I can already tell that feels better. So you'll get used to how it's supposed to feel the more of these that you do. There we go. Okay, the next step is to cover these again so that they rise and get nice and puffy before we bake them. So sometimes I use plastic wrap that I just spray with some of that avocado oil spray I used earlier. But I already have one towel wet and it's really easy to wet another one, so I'm just gonna use my wet tea towels. Basically, I just don't want these to dry out, so I'm gonna let them sit here for about another hour, although I think it's gonna be shorter than that in my kitchen. Like I said, my kitchen is very hot today, so I'll let these rise and I'll keep checking on them until they're nice and puffy. The buns are nice and puffy, so now I'm going to brush them with melted butter first. You could just do melted butter if you want to leave them without any toppings, but I really like to top mine with sesame seeds, and I have found that you really need to put an egg wash in order for the sesame seeds to stick well. So first I do the butter, and then after I'm done with this, I'll brush it with the egg wash. And for the egg wash, I'm just gonna use an egg white. Mixed with a couple tablespoons of water. So now I'll just brush this right on top of the butter. And I forgot to mention, but towards the end of these rising, I preheated my oven to 375. And like I said, the egg wash really helps whatever seeds you're gonna top these with to adhere. All right, and then my last step before baking is to sprinkle these with sesame seeds. So I'm gonna do that. And now these are going into the oven for, I'm gonna start with 15 minutes and then I'll check on them and see. The buns are done and looking beautiful. This one had a big bubble that popped, so that's why it looks like that. So now I'm going to separate them. I just transferred them to my cooling rack so that they can completely cool before I cut them. They are looking so good. These buns make your whole house smell amazing. Seriously, it smells like a bakery. So I'll just let these cool, and then once they're fully cooled, I'll come back and cut them in half, and then I'll reserve some for eating in the next few days, and the rest I'll put in the freezer. I hope that this video gave you a little bit of confidence to give these a try, because they really are so delicious and, in my opinion, very worth the effort. So I hope you try them, and I'll see you in my next video.